Welcome back to the Philosophemes Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Scalambrino. I'm proud to be part of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Thank you for being here. The less technological mediation you have, the closer you are to base reality. That's what I want to say, but I don't know if that's necessarily true, but that's my intuition, at least. I guess I could put it that way. That's my intuition. And so therefore, these newer generations that are so habituated to a technologically mediated reality, they are less in touch with actual reality than we are, and we once were, if that makes sense.
It does, man. You know, and I actually don't remember. I'd have to go back and look at our book, which I have right here. And to the extent we don't, I'm assuming we don't because I'm not going to go back and look at it right now.
Okay.
I don't think the types nor the levels of resolution of simulation are exclusive. I think more than one type at the three levels of resolution can coexist at the same time.
Okay.
Given a sufficiently powerful computational architecture. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
And what I think is particularly compelling about what you just said, and we do talk about this in the virtual type.
Okay.
Where you can instantiate a simulation inside of a simulation.
Okay.
So there's base reality, there's a derived simulation, and inside of that simulation, and that's really where you start getting down to the mental type, right?
Okay.
That strikes me one as entirely computationally feasible.
Okay.
That is what is called a computable solvable problem.
Okay.
Right? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I agree with you that the more nested you are, the farther away you are from base reality. And to me, computationally, that's necessarily true. Because you're going through increasing levels of mediation. And so if nothing else, let's say there's perfect fidelity, because we talk about fidelity quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's say there's perfect fidelity. You're still incurring overhead in the processing, which means there's latency. So there's a slowdown in how that simulation is being generated, which I think in some parts, and like in the documentary, that's my take on when people talk about their experience, like with deja vu. It's an artifact in the rendering, but I think it's in part of some type of computational overhead that's being incurred because of the necessary type of simulation they're in.
That's heavy.
Yeah. Because I think about this, the one of the examples, because we talk a bit about the Matrix movie, which, I think for our generation was like,
Yeah.
What a beautiful piece of art.
Yeah.
Okay. And science and philosophy, by my estimation. And there's that poignant scene in the Matrix in the third act where the black cat comes through. And then it comes through again. And some Neo says, hey, what the fuck? I just saw two black cats. And somebody says, maybe it was Trinity. What did you say? And that's the idea. It stays.
Was it the same? Right. Was it the same?
Yeah, right. And so computationally, then the idea would be, I have an NPC, black cat, and it walks from A to B. That's a pathfinding algorithm, completely solved computational problem. But to inject another black cat that's identical to it, to the degree we can't perceive the difference, incurs more computational overhead.
Okay.
Right? And so part of what you're saying in this context, to ground it like in something everybody experiences, deja vu, to the degree that we're in some type of simulation, there's a level of overhead associated with that processing. And because of that, you can, to me, immediately tell on the second black cat, you're at least two levels nested. which means you're 2 levels removed from base reality.
Yes.
Okay. And so let's say actual simulation is not possible given our universal constraint. So
Okay.
we're within the bounds of the universe. And so we have a virtual simulation. That's layer 1. I see the black cat. Then I see a second black cat that's purportedly identical, thus deja vu.
Mm-hmm.
My probabilistic view of that in some sense is I'm at least another layer deeper.
Okay.
Right. So now
Okay.
I'm 2 levels removed from base reality. And I think that's what that scene tells me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pittman, for being here with us and taking the time to chat with us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Frank. Dr. Scalambrino. It's such a pleasure to say that, man. We've been friends for so long. And, you know, amongst our peer group, like, there's only like 3 of us from that graduating class. Jason's fine, dude, like 100%. And I couldn't be more pleased, man. I think we did great work in that book. We talked for like 2 years
Yeah.
before we
Yeah.
actually started writing it. You know, I came out to Colorado. We had a great 1-week writing session to lay out the architecture of the architecture, as it were. And yeah, man, let's just talk about these ideas.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed writing this book with you. I miss all of our conversations on such a regular basis, and I think we came up with some really good stuff. I think that in the future, when people engage simulation theory, and I see people on social media talking about engaging simulation theory more and more all the time. I think that as they begin to sincerely engage simulation theory, to truly philosophize about simulation theory, I think they're going to recognize the value of our book. So I'm happy about that.
And I think the beauty of it, if I may, is because we're different,
Mhm.
you know, the way we're approaching the material, I think it makes it accessible to everyone, depending on, I should say
agree.
not depending, but regardless of where they're at and how they're approaching it through their perception. Like there's something there that allows you to think about, if I assume this is real or not real, how can I go about wrestling with this material in a really like cogent, stable, grounded way so that you're not, and you were saying this at some point.
This episode is brought to you by Google Gemini. With the Gemini app, you can talk live and have a real-time conversation with an AI assistant. It's great for all kinds of things, like if you want to practice for an upcoming interview, ask for advice on things to do in a new city, or brainstorm creative ideas. And by the way, this script was actually read by Gemini. Download the Gemini app for iOS and Android today. Must be 18 plus to use Gemini Live.
Hey, it's Austin James. Yes, I'm living with diabetes, but it doesn't have to define me. Thanks to the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor, I get real-time glucose readings throughout the day. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor is small and easy to wear, giving me the freedom to focus on my life as a parent and a musician. Now this is progress. You can get a free sensor at freestylelibre.us.
Offer available for people who qualify. Visit myfreestyle.us to see all terms and conditions. Certain exclusions apply. Data on file, Abbott Diabetes Care. Per prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
Talking about different things at the same time, because you can't make progress that way. We have to have some grounded reality, even to the degree it might be simulated, so that we can actually have a discussion about, you know, my approach is I'm going to assume this is real. What would it take to make that real? You know, as a computer scientist, that's how I approach it.
Yeah, no, well said. I feel like, you know, it almost goes to this, like, I'm thinking of Habermas and this idea of like, well, we're already agreeing to speak to each other in English, right? So we're already adopting rules, right? We're already agreeing to certain rules, and most people overlook that. And then, you know, it should be the case that we are agreeing on the context that we're talking inside of as well. You know, like what kind of simulation are we talking about? And I think that's the big thing in these conversations about simulation that a lot of these folks are missing, is that they're not taking into consideration, well, you've got to make sure you understand there are essentially distinct contexts, and you have to make sure that you're both talking in the same context, because if you're not talking in the same context, you're just not talking about the same thing, right? And you're gonna come up with a theory that's incoherent. Yeah.
And I think that's where what I admire about you as a partner and a deep, dear friend to me. But as professionals, that's where our fields align, is around propositional logic.
Yeah, that's true.
And so that's the base structure we're deriving all of our ideas from. And they're just inherently cogent to the degree that those are the ones we allowed to be into our work.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting because and I should have said this in the introduction, but I mean it's like it really truly is the case that I've known you my entire life, you know.
Yeah.
And
Since
it's
we
like
were little kids.
yeah, right. You know, and it's like we played sports together. I mean, we grew up together. I mean, it's you know, that's a special thing, you know, and it's amazing to get to still be able to have these conversations with each other and to be able to produce a book like this, to be able to produce a piece of art that will, you know, go into the future, as it were, whenever we are no longer in meat space.
Yeah.
You know, I'm very happy about that. I think that's wonderful. So,
Well, you know, as a potential segue, well, let's see where this train of thought
yeah,
goes.
sure.
I think I said this to you at least once, if not several times, and so everybody understands. Over those 2 years that went into the just generating the seed idea for this book, I mean, we talked every Friday for 2 to 4 hours. We talked a lot about various ideas that started circling the drain, as it were, around, oh, this is what we're actually talking about. And that took a lot of negotiating that framework in that common stable space. And I do think it's very special that, one, we were able to engage in that to begin with. We just found each other randomly one day. And we had this synchronicity, as it were, that led us to these conversations that evolved into, especially after both of us watched the documentary that we cite in the book. This is what we're actually talking about. And if we're going to wrestle with this in a real intellectual way, it's not about saying it is or is not. It's about what is the framework within which you can think about whether it's real or not.
And I would say already it's shown to stand the test of time as well. I mean, I know that it's only a few years old at this point, but you know, there is some sense in which this technology is evolving so rapidly. Maybe this is not surprising to some people, but this just blew my mind, is that I made a video, and in that video, I posted it to YouTube a couple years ago or maybe a year ago, but in either case, I made this video and I made this prediction. I was like, look, you know, they can already do A, they can already do B. I think that they're going to be able to do C eventually. And it was within 3 weeks of me posting the video, they were already doing it. I mean, it was like, it's moving so fast, right? And now, as you know, this idea that you can train these AI models visually, right? And you know, I had shared with you just the other day that they are training these robots to perform surgery, and that they are training them visually, and that these robots are learning how to do things that, you know, that essentially were never explicitly taught to the robot. Like if they're you know, stitching somebody up and they drop the needle, they're picking the needle up on their own, and these kinds of things, you know. So anyway, it's just moving so fast. The ability to, so I just discovered there are full-on podcasts now that are totally AI. They're totally AI, right? So this guy, I asked him explicitly, and he answered me. I think it was the real person behind the scenes, but we'll see. But he said to me, I'm assuming it's a male, or I don't know if I should be saying he or not. But in either case, the person behind this AI podcast answered my question by saying that the entire podcast is scripted by AI, and all of the voices inside the podcast are AI. So anyway, you know, I mean, this is just, it's so. I'm sure that there's some sci-fi movie from 20 years ago had this idea, but there is some strange sense in which it's already like the computer is speaking to the computer, and you know, it doesn't really even matter. It doesn't even matter anymore if the humans are around, right? And so anyway, but despite this rapid growth and all of these things that are happening, the truth of our book still holds, right? Our book is still accurate, despite all of these innovations and evolutions. So I'm happy to see that. Yeah.
Well, you know, to one of your points, man, the other day, I should back up. often, because of the nature of my life, I interact with these advanced AIs one-on-one. So I'll say, hey, look, you're this kind of expert. You know this. I have questions. Here's my questions. And it'll answer them. And increasingly, they're more sophisticated. It's super more advanced than it was 6 months ago.
Wow.
Okay. The hallucinations are almost gone. It's very powerful.
Wow.
And the other day, I just wondered, like, well, wait a minute. Why do I want to have a one-on-one conversation? Why don't I have a bunch of you debate amongst yourselves? And I'm just going to observe it and watch. And it can do it, man. You can do it. It can do it. You don't have to tell it you're this persona, you're this persona, you're this persona. You just rig up this abstract example of, look, this is what I want you to debate about. I want X number of you. Debate it based on your experience, and let's find out what the consensus is.
Wow.
Yeah. And so starts to get into, this is a little bit of a tangent, but we're talking about like the frontier of what's available to us right now. That gets into what is called agentic AI. Okay. And so the idea is that an AI has agency.
Okay.
And so it's increasingly autonomous.
Okay.
And that's an example of it. Like, look, man, I want 5 of you to debate this question. You're a philosopher, you're a computer scientist, you're an AI engineer, whatever. And here's the question.
Well, so a year ago, well, let's go 2 years ago. 2 years ago, you said to me that AIs hallucinate, and
yes.
and I thought to myself, this makes no sense. Like I how on earth could this, this is a metaphor. Like what are you talking about? Right now you say to me, AIs hallucinate. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, you might as well just say, if you're thirsty, here's a glass of water. I mean, it makes perfect sense now. Yeah.
Right. And what I'm really saying is the current models that are available do not hallucinate.
Do not. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No,
now, within, I'm going to say 6 months, the problem's been more or less solved. More or less, not perfectly, but to a degree that, okay, man, I guess you're not hallucinating anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I guess, in a sense, it's like that's why our book and the things that we talk about are so relevant, right? Because it's like, well, what are the implications of this? Like, where are the limits, right? Like, where does this stuff stop? I mean, it is. I feel like there's some movie bouncing around in the back of my head. I think that some sci-fi futurist had touched on this, but at some point, and I think your point about something has to power all of this is a great, there has to be some material condition for this. But at some point, it's like, does it matter if there's humans involved anymore? I mean, I keep thinking of this post-human. I keep thinking of this like post-human reality where, and I think we were touching on this earlier. Not only is it the case that you're not able to participate in the reality without the technological mediation anymore, but also this sense in which, like you really have, because of that, but also because of other reasons, you really have sort of merged with the machine, right? Like you really are, to a certain extent, you really are post-human to a certain extent. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Frank, because, when we started talking about this, it always struck me as, from a computational theory and a computability theory, it's obvious to me, and I'm open to being wrong here, but it's obvious to me that it's certainly possible. Now, how do you turn theory into a practical application, which is more of where I lean? Well, now it's a question of how do you scale it up? Because I need energy to power a computer to be an information processing system. Okay, well, like I can plug my computer in the wall and I got plenty of power. And that can produce a local simulation to some level of resolution. And that's part of what our framework lays out. I would concede that that's not sufficient to power the simulation that we're discussing, but it's a simulation nonetheless on some level of resolution. Okay, well, what happens when I have a Dyson sphere and I have the power of a star? What happens when I'm a type 2 Kardashev society and now I have the power of a solar system?
Yeah.
That's a lot of power. And now when you, in addition to that, rig up a Matryoshka brain, and I have a computer that is a star or a solar system, and it's the next solar system over, like it's not obvious. This is what I would categorically say. It's not obvious to me that it's not possible. The
Yeah.
question becomes at what type and what level of resolution could it be true?
Right. Right. Well, and it seems as though it's certainly possible and plausible, I think, that future generations, depending upon how they conceptualize individuality, that, you could, I mean, I don't know, from where I'm standing in time right now, it seems like I continue to think that it's not possible to get around supernatural forces, right? I keep thinking that, hey, no matter what kind of a tower we build, that, that the gods or that God is still in charge, right? Yeah, that,
Sure.
that you can't, right? So that, but at the same time, depending upon how future generations conceptualize individuality, it may, and I think that, ultimately, not to segue into any kind of existentialism, but I think ultimately it's gonna depend upon how they handle death. It's gonna depend on how they conceptualize death. But it could be the case that if you were to sufficiently bracket individuality, that you then, you're just, it's like you were saying earlier, it's like the simulation becomes the simulation becomes, maybe I'm okay, so I'll put it like this. The simulation becomes the base reality, and the meat is just something that you feed into the virtual machine.
Yeah. Well, and I think another way to go about approaching that, I agree with you. Another way to go about approach the thinking of that in the context of NPCs, for instance, is, like the documentary that informed some of our thinking refers to NPCs as not just an abstraction, but that they're interchangeable, meaning one NPC is just another NPC. And so maybe they have a different color shirt on, but that's just a programming trick. They're all, let's say, in this architecture on the same level. It's not obvious to me that has to be true. What I think about is you could have an architecture within an architecture, and that inner architecture is just the NPC architecture. And this is where, like earlier, we were talking about Ellul's technique being the abstraction of all NPCs in some sense, where, in Minecraft, which the documentary, and we use in the book too as an example, all NPCs are more or less equivalent in terms of their, let's say, computational instantiation.
Okay.
And so maybe they have a beard or they have a different shirt on, but again, that's just pixels on a screen. But let's take the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight as an example.
Okay.
There's no reason for me to suspect computationally that one is an NPC and one's not. They could both be NPCs. You and I could be NPCs in some sufficiently abstract architecture and still be differentiated, right? We're just derived from a base in computing, what's called a base class, NPC. Yeah, but I'm the Jason version of that. You're the Frank version of that. And we're materially different because we have different attributes. Okay. But we're still NPCs. And what I tend to wonder about as we were working in the book and in the years since is not only is it possible to differentiate between NPC and non-NPC, but is it possible to differentiate between NPCs? Because you want to position them somewhere different in this hierarchy and ascribe value to it for some reason. Like we were talking about the difference between a rock, an animal, a human.
Well, there it is. Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you, Frank, this is a scoop, as it were. 8 months ago, when I first started talking about this idea of how to test an NPC to try and determine if it's an NPC, it's just no longer valid, as far as I can tell. That's how fast AI has evolved. And so originally my idea was to engage in a dialogue, and it essentially centered around two factors: memories and time within the memory. Okay. Because at that time, no pun intended, AI was not sufficiently advanced to construct what we would think of as a memory. And it sure as shit couldn't manipulate time inside of it. Okay. Because it's just too nested, right?
Okay.
Whereas if I ask you, hey, Frank, think about a time when we were kids together, call up a memory, tell me that memory, and then within that memory, start to manipulate time so it's faster or slower, and give me the details of that. Yeah. And through that dialogue, you could suss out at that point whether or not the AI was an AI or not. This isn't a Turing test per se, but my idea is modeled off the concept of a Turing test.
Okay.
And listen, man, I just had this conversation with the current 4.0 beta of ChatGPT, and listen, man, like
it can do it.
And it's not obvious to me that it's not an AI. It's not obvious. And that's been 6 or 8 months at best.
Yeah. No, this is why I feel like every time this is a topic, it's like I'm constantly asking the question of limits. Like where are the limits of this thing? Like, yeah. But I said this the other day in a post on LinkedIn, and some people thought that it was funny, and it is kind of funny, but at the same time, it's like, well, but it's also kind of real. It is real, and that is that if on the one hand you could say that behaving in a certain way is completely irrational, right? But if it's a choice that doesn't really, I guess I want to say something like, if it's a choice that doesn't really matter, right? Then, like, so for example, do you name your car? Do you have a name for your car? You know what I mean? Like, whatever. Right. Yeah. Right. So it's like, okay, so if it's the case that future generations treat AI with the dignity of a sentient being or something like that, well then, then that's going to be the reality. There's no reason, so I feel like it is perfectly possible and plausible that people can change their understanding of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And change their understanding of what it means to be human based on the insights that they've gained from AI. And there is this sort of strange, deep sense in which then AI has taught the human that the human is not human, right? And then you are full on post-human, right? So, you just got to, I think ultimately it just kind of comes down to they've got to be able to bracket their ego enough to think that their material instantiation is not any more important than anybody else's material instantiation.
Yeah, dude, I love it. That's heavy. So like, it's not obvious to me that if I were to engage to a sufficient level, now I don't know what that level is. I suspect it's different for different individual human beings. But I do believe there's some threshold, okay? Where when I exceed that threshold in interacting with an AI, because it's fundamentally technologically mediated, right? It's not this physical object. It's inside of it.
That's
So it's
interesting.
nested within it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I know
And
that. I love that. I love that. Yeah.
The physical thing is mediating it, and that is not only technique, but also technology, is my understanding.
Yes.
And because that is mediating my experience with it, but I'm developing a relation to it such that it's coming up to me in that architecture.
Mhm.
It's not obvious to me why I would value it less than where it's at in that architecture. It's not a rock.
Right.
I can have a conversation with it.
Right.
It'll talk to me. It'll give me answers. It'll dialogue with me.
Yep.
It will do work for me.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's it. That's the truth.
Yeah, right. And then I think part of what our book lays out then is, how do I start to think about which one of us is in the simulation? Are we both in the same one? Is it in it and I'm in base reality? Or am I in the simulation and it's external to me somehow, either in another upper layer of simulation or in base reality? And then I think, well, then, like, why does it matter though? Like,
Yeah. Well, and I would go so far as to say, I mean, this reminds me so much of like a Platonic theory of forms, right? That the forms are what's more real. The material instantiation is not the base reality. The forms are more real. And so, and this was how the example, the Plato's cave, and the example that we gave in regard to how the only way that an actual simulation could be real, right? And so you get this sense in which, if it's the computation that's real and the material instantiation is really just a kind of expression of this reality that is actually a simulation, then yeah, you're right. I mean, hey, one computation is just as good as another.
yeah, right. Oh, that's a great insight, because one of the things I think about is, easy computational example. My input is 2, and the addition symbol. The function is to take the 2 numeric symbols and the operator symbol and produce the arithmetic, which is 4, right? Well, like, is 2 plus symbol any less real or more real than 4? Computation says they're equivalent. 4 is just the expression of the symbols with the other symbol.
Interesting.
Right? It's the function that's just rendering the output, but it's not changing the nature of it.
So are you saying something like, it could be argued that privileging meat space is really privileging like the rendering process?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Well said. Which to me is not obviously a necessarily valid conclusion.
Well, right. Yeah. As soon as you flip it, you just have to flip the switch, right? As soon as you flip it, then wow. Yeah. No, that's super heavy. It's super heavy.
Because at the base of it, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think this is where you and I come together, is because to me, that is propositionally valid. P implies Q.
Oh yeah. Oh no. Yeah, no. Yes, it is valid. It is valid. The question becomes something like, does its soundness depend upon individual choice or something like that? I mean, so this is why. Okay, so forgive me if I could take one step back just to kind of make a gesture toward context here. Is that I believe that I didn't get too explicit about this in the book, but this idea of like, if I talk about this in a recent podcast that just came out, where if you think about the relationship between, in the history and tradition of Western philosophy, what's called like the city of God versus the city of man or the city of human, and then what we're seeing now is this city of post-human. And so if you think about it in those terms, you could see that from the point of view of the human, the city of God is absolute, right? So it's just like, these are the limits, and these are hard, fast limits. You cannot get outside of these limits. Getting outside of these limits is death, right? And so therefore, individuals living in the city of God have a vested interest in privileging meat space, because how they interact with meat space then, has this implication in regard to eternity. So, or it has this implication in regard to individuality outside of meat space, right? After the afterlife or something. So then you get into the city of man, and you see this. It's more relative. So you get this sense in which it's like, well, sure, there may be these absolute limits, but there's a lot of limits within those absolute limits that are just relative, right? And so therefore, if I drive my car too fast in this speed zone, that doesn't mean that then I don't get to go to heaven, and so therefore, if I want to drive my car fast, I can drive my car fast, or something along those lines, right? But then you get to this post-human space where it's like, well, once you have started to think that the limits that determine your humanity are also relative, right? And then you get into this space where it's like, well, does it change reality whether I'm alive or whether I'm dead, right?
Yeah.
And right. And as soon as you accept that it doesn't, well then, meat space is just one more expression of the computation.
Yes. And this is why, I agree with you from a computational perspective, because we know, just look at our AI systems, given the constraints in the universe on computation fundamentally in all of its current forms, we don't have another form, is discrete. It's binary. It's zeros and ones. No matter what you do, no matter what tricks you paint, it's a discrete deterministic system. However, within that determinism, because of its infinity, just think about the set of integers, right? It's infinite. We can instantiate a non-deterministic system.
It's heavy.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of the logic we lay out across all the types and levels of resolution of potential simulation is, despite base reality fundamentally, as far as we can tell, assuming we're in base reality right now, the universe is computationally discrete, we can instantiate non-deterministic systems. It's just because of the scope of what infinity represents.
Interesting. And so you're saying something like, I think you're saying several things there, but one of the things that you're saying is something like this is what is allowing for AI its sort of nested position to be able to reason, for example. It's
Correct.
for its ability to become autonomous.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Wow.
Right. So like if you take an extreme example of autonomy, and listen, man, this is heavy to me. There are two prescribed measures of autonomy, and they're fundamentally the same. It's just one is a 5-point scale and one's 10. 10 and 5 represent the same thing. And so when people talk about autonomous systems, when you talk about a fully autonomous system, and so this is like frontier tech in AI. We talked about this a little bit ago. That's agentic AI. If you have a fully autonomous system, this is where people get it twisted. So level 5 or level 10, depending on which scale you're using.
Okay.
A human cannot intervene. If a system is truly autonomous to level 5 or level 10, a human cannot intervene in its behaviors.
So you mean to say, it can't interrupt or influence necessarily, but it could wage war against it, right? But it couldn't. I guess what I'm trying to say is that. So help me understand this. So
Sure.
you're saying something like the human being can't intervene. So it's so autonomous that it can choose to not allow the human to override it.
Yes.
Right. But at the same time, so I guess at the same time, it could fight back against the human trying to. Right. Yeah. Right. Okay.
And so this is what I think connects back to some of our ideas. There's a lot of people that think about, well, what happens if that happens? Like you get Skynet, okay, from the Terminator movies. But the side of that people don't think about is the reason why that system can do that, and the reason why a human cannot intervene in its decision making is because it's perfectly able to handle uncertainty.
Interesting. Can you tell me some more about that? That's great.
So let's go to the opposite side of the scale.
Okay.
A level 1 autonomous system is essentially a remote controlled robot. There's a human controlling it step by step, decision by decision.
Okay.
And so as you go up the scale towards 5 or 10, depending on which one you're on, right? They all start at 1. What you're doing is you're removing the human intervention in decision making and behavior.
Okay.
And the system is able to make decisions autonomously in wider fields of uncertainty. And so if I say, hey, I have a Tesla that has full self-driving. If that were truly autonomous, one, I could not stop it. As the operator, I could not intervene in anything it's doing.
Oh,
I'm just
right. Which is my understanding of these taxis don't have pedals. They don't have pedals, and they don't have steering wheels. Yeah, right.
Right. Okay. What makes that difficult to implement, which is the problem like Tesla's hit as a company, is in order to do that, the system has to handle, I mean, in some literal sense, all possible conditions. Well, I mean, think about, let alone the constraint of the universe, which seems to be the computational constraint. Think about that in a localized context. You're driving up Highway 77 to Cleveland. Dude, there's a lot of chaos, right?
Especially around Akron.
There's cars, there's debris. Maybe it's winter and there's snow and it's reflecting your headlights. So you don't see the different speed sign, whatever, right?
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah.
That's a lot of uncertainty that you can't program that into a system because it won't scale. It won't be able to operate computationally. There's too much overhead. And so the system has to make autonomous decisions. The more decisions a system can make in a bigger field of uncertainty, the more autonomous it is. The more autonomous it gets, the less human interaction it needs. And then at that extreme, back to where we started, when it's fully autonomous, it can handle perfect uncertainty, and the human cannot intervene. There is no power off button. There's no pulling the plug.
Yeah. No, so again, this is one of these things where it's like, 2 years ago, I am shocked to hear myself saying this stuff, but it's like 2 years ago, you say this stuff to me and I'm like, yeah, that's Hollywood. It's a movie. That's not reality. And now I'm like, that makes perfect sense. We can see it. We can see it happening. We can see it coming. Yeah. I mean, because it's just a matter of how much time you've spent training the model, right? I mean,
yeah, in some sense.
Once it right. I mean, look, if the AI is capable of learning visually, and if the AI is capable of figuring things out that you're not even trying to teach it, then why would we think that the AI wouldn't recognize at some point that we are the ones training it?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, right, because you tell me what
we're
you think
a data set. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well said, dude. Yeah, I like that. So tell me what you think about this from a philosophical perspective, because to me, computationally, in the sense of like a computational theory, reasoning is the ability to take one example and extrapolate it to another example.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And
So yeah.
go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
No. So, this is, I think that this is, a great question. I should try to put some sort of long form response together for you in regard to this. But the thing that, so I tend to think of this along two lines, right? And I'm just operating from memory here. I didn't prepare anything for this question, but I tend to think of reasoning in terms of conditional judgments. I tend to think of it in terms of if-then statements, right? The ability, and so therefore, I mean, already, if that is a sort of basic building block of the reasoning process, then there's a sense in which programming is already reasoning to a lesser degree, right? Yeah. So I tend to think that, and then I want to say something like, well, I think of rationality as just the ability to determine ratios, and I think that, I mean, as soon as you're able to lay a grid on meat space and then get angles and get distances, then you've already got ratios. And so if you can do that, and you can plug that into if-then statements, then I think you've got some form of reasoning. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, man, your intuition is computationally correct, because all a reasoning system requires is three things.
Mm-hmm.
And one is a map of the current world state, whatever that is that the system's operating in, okay?
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
And the way we represent that is with graphs. They're knowledge graphs.
Okay.
Here's my snapshot of the state of the world.
Uh-huh.
Then I need two things to think about that to reach a decision. I need rules and I need facts. So here's the facts of the world as it's represented in the graph. And I need essentially symbolic, propositional, and predicate logic to reason or make decisions about the state of the world given those facts.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's called a neurosymbolic AI.
So I mean, what I'm hearing is something like context, structure, and instantiation.
Yep, spot on.
Yeah.
And we have those systems. They're called neurosymbolic AIs.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't doubt it. 2 years ago,
It didn't exist.
Yeah, 2 years ago, I may have been like, I don't know about this, but now I'm just like, no, we're gonna hit the limit. We're gonna hit the limit. Yep.
And with those systems, just so you know, with those systems, let me think about how to say this. Within a part of the world I exist in, the only thing that prevents those systems from being fully autonomous is a human decision to not allow them to be fully autonomous.
Right. I believe that. Yes. Yep. Yeah, I believe that.
Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they're fully capable of it.
Uh-huh.
They can operate in perfect uncertainty.
So it's fascinating to me. We see this with Google's AI, and I think this has been a big point of contention between Grok versus Gemini and these sorts of things, right? But and I admittedly, GPT is the one I know the least about, but there has been, it seems like, some kind of movement to try to factor in like emotional intelligence into these AIs. And, I feel like on some level that's just kind of trying to teach the AI bias, right? You're trying to build some kind of bias in. I don't know. I mean, I guess that makes it more lifelike or more human-like or something like that. But I don't know. I feel like I would prefer an AI that is autonomous and is not arbitrarily limited by, biases that have been sort of pushed on it by, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And so like I'll give you a discrete example, like in the context of NPCs.
Mhm.
So not too long after we finished the book, you and I started talking about NPCs because they featured a lot in the documentary and all that, right?
Mhm.
And I rigged up that idea on how to test them and so forth and so on. And a lot of that computationally or, programmatically is informed by video games.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
The best example from the documentary was Minecraft. We used that in the book a little bit. And that was very rudimentary AI compared to what we have now.
Mhm.
And so the cutting edge of research in constructing video game NPCs almost entirely has them linked up to something like ChatGPT.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Okay. I'm with you. Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is by large and far, not 100%, but the majority do that so that the NPC is generating, let's say, believable dialogue.
Okay.
Okay. Such that when you're interacting with it, it gives you the emotional attachment of you're talking to a partial person.
Okay. This makes sense. Yeah.
I think where some of that architecture right now has a gap is the technology isn't harnessing the reasoning capabilities of like frontier AI, like neurosymbolic or agentic,
Mhm.
such that the NPC truly behaves like what you would expect a person to behave. It's not just the dialogue, it's how it exists in that simulation.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I love the way you put that, by the way. It's really very well said, sincerely.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I guess, I don't know. I mean, this may be a strange thing to say, but I kind of feel like, well, okay, so at one point I thought this is all fantasy. This was never going to happen. It's a waste of time. The Terminator stuff is just Hollywood, and so on and so forth. But now I find myself saying something like, well, you know what? It'll be interesting to see how we are judged by the AI. I'm curious to see what the AI is going to think about us, what the AI is going to say about us. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like, because I often use some of these advanced systems, let's call them like research assistants, in the sense that not only do I ask them to do things like, let's say, literature reviews that I don't necessarily want to do because they're tedious and time consuming.
Mhm.
Perfect use of an assistant.
I didn't know you could do that. I'm like, oh, I got to get one of these assistants now. I spend so much time doing literature review. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, man, dude.
Chat GPT, here I come. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But they're augmentative. To me, in my thinking, they're a little more than what I would necessarily think. Like, let's say I'm running a lab, like I have, and I have an undergrad, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're a bit beyond that, and I think what skews people's perception is like this idea from Kurzweil about the singularity. Like, there's going to be this flashpoint at which we achieve exponential growth, and I think a lot of people missed it. Listen, dude, we're in it.
Yes.
It's not coming.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. We're in it. Yep. We're in it.
Mm-hmm. And, I have these conversations with these systems, and I often find myself increasingly asking them, here's what I think, where am I wrong?
That's heavy.
And so in a very short amount of time, it's gone from here's the prompt, give me this information, to look, this is what I think is true. Yeah. Tell me where it's false.
Yeah. Yep. No, and this is interestingly, I didn't realize that this was going to be a kind of a theme of this conversation, but it really is a theme of this conversation. It seems to me that, what is going on is that it's about a perspective shift. It's about a human perspective shift, and it really is AI that's helping to bring about that perspective shift for the human, right? And when the human has that perspective shift, I think that's when the human becomes post-human. The singularity, I believe we're inside of it. We just haven't learned. They haven't. We're training them, but they haven't trained us yet to see it. Once they train us to see it, then we'll recognize the singularity. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and in part, Frank, like when I was thinking about what it would take to rig up an information processing system to generate a simulation, and I think I remember a couple Fridays where we had this like 2 to 4 hour conversation, you know what I mean? Where the human condition is not sufficient to produce that architecture at a scale that it's reasonable that it can generate a simulation. But man, when you're augmented by an AI, now you're just on a power scale that's at exponential.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, it's just the rate of information processing. Like in a computational sense, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
To rig up a Dyson sphere and harness the power of a star is like a really big problem, man. Like there's a lot of engineering that has to go in to make that work. And it strikes me as being beyond the scale of what humans can do by themselves, because it's just the sheer volume of information that has to be processed to make that work. But man, when you're augmented by an advanced AI, even at the level we have right now, let alone what's coming in 6 to 8 months, okay? Or months, 2 years from now.
It's amazing. Yeah, no, it really is true though. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
The ability for those systems to extrapolate and handle uncertainty I'm convinced we're inside the singularity for sure.
Yeah. Yep. I'm convinced as well. I like I said, I wasn't, and I was resistant to this idea. I tried every way under the sun to resist it, but now I'm just like, no, it's here. It is absolutely here.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So one of the things that we're talking about is that this. I mean, I would try to paraphrase it by saying something like it's like we're talking about the power and capacity of AI to produce, to function, to control a simulation, to produce a simulation and to perform inside of that simulation. And when we're talking about it at this level of resolution or at this level of zoom or at this level of abstraction, I think that all of these answers that we're giving, I agree with them. I stand by them, right? But one of the things that I'm seeing, and I guess this goes back to a question that I had asked you earlier, but one of the things that I'm seeing, if you zoom way in, right? Like if we zoom way in to like one specific topic, whatever it might be, like we're talking about, I'll give you an example. I'm trying to be less critical. I'm just trying to like use kid gloves with these social media people. So I'm trying to not be so critical of them anymore. But there's a discussion. So there's an AI scripted discussion of a book. My thought is that AI is just sort of what's the technical term? It's not skimming, or maybe it is skimming, scraping. The AI is essentially scraping all of this data that it can find in regard to this philosophy book, for example. And then AI is taking the data that it's scraping, and then it's formulating some sort of a thesis, producing this output file with a style of rhetoric that I think is still noticeable. And then they're putting this out, sharing this globally, so that then you can see, in essence, what is the best of or at least I see, and this is the point of contention. I don't know that it's the best. I think it's the most popular, or it is what is been privileged the most to give it enough weight so that AI would scrape it, right? And I think that at some point that's a mistake, right? So at some point, what we're going to have to understand is that if you're going to train a model, you don't train. We've laid the foundation for this. If you don't want the model to hallucinate, right? Even if the model does not believe it's hallucinating, it is a subset of hallucinating. Then you're going to have to train the model with, as you had said earlier, with facts. You're going to have to train the model with accurate information. And I feel as though what's still happening at these localized levels is that, so for example, I'm certain that these AIs are scraping the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I'm certain that these AIs are scraping Wikipedia. I'm certain that these AIs are scraping all of these platforms, and the platforms have been democratized. Are already been democratized. And so anyway, long story short, I feel like they are still operating with principles that are contributing to and facilitating the AI hallucinating. They're not. Yeah. And I think that's human error. That's a human error. And what's so odd about that is that it's the democratization process of the technology that is, in my opinion, producing that human error. Like they need, you can't feed. Look, so it's like you can't weight the information or the data just because, it came from a source that is really popular, because, being popular does not make it accurate. Being popular does not make it true or right. Yeah. So I feel like, so you're producing this product, and it is supposed to be art, and it is supposed to be some kind of an accurate, I guess it is a question as to whether or not they're trying to be right, or they're trying to be true. But it seems like they are trying to be true. Like it's not rap or word salad or something like that, right? Like they're trying to accurately depict a philosophy text, and they're not doing it. They're falling radically short of depicting these philosophy texts. They're coming up with these answers. They're saying, like, for example, this is what Nietzsche means by this, and it's just like, that is not what Nietzsche meant. What the output is wrong. So forgive me. That was a little longer than it needed to be. But yeah.
Let me hit you with this.
Yeah.
As you were talking, I'm thinking about it, and it just occurred to me.
Okay.
I think you did a really good job in our book of talking about Baudrillard.
Okay.
And simulation and simulacra.
Mm-hmm.
And it just hit me, man. Tell me what you think about this idea.
Okay.
Really, what you're talking about are low resolution, or in the younger generation's parlance, scuff simulacra.
Okay.
And
I've heard this term yet. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just low fidelity. That's what our book would call it. It's a low fidelity simulation of a simulation.
Interesting.
And sometimes I think about these frontier AI systems, despite how powerful they are,
mm-hmm.
there are infantile attempts at creating life.
Interesting.
Like in the universal abstraction. Okay. Because I think about, like, we go back to, we were talking about the VR experience, right? Like, I played that game for a little bit. Dude, it sucks. Like, I'm just being honest. As somebody that grew up with video games from 8-bit to current generation.
Yeah.
Like, listen, man, I don't know what you all are talking about, but like, this is scuff as fuck. Like, it's just horrible, man. You know what I mean? Like, it's like low res polygon bullshit. But man, it has this life of its own.
Yep.
In a way that it's pretending to be something that's real.
Mm-hmm.
And it's believable enough that to the people experience it, it's more real than real, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you were talking, I just kept thinking about, no, man, this is just like a low fidelity simulacra. We're not aware of it. I'm not convinced we know what we're doing necessarily in creating it,
Yeah.
but we're creating it and we're exponentially getting better at it.
See, that's so fascinating to me. And so this is where, you know, in some ways it's kind of coming full circle, because one of the things that I keep seeing is so that then there's this sense in which it's like, well, you can't criticize my AI, you know, and it's just like, well, if I can't criticize your AI, you know, it's like, well, what are we doing, right? What are we doing if I can't criticize your AI? I mean,
it's the emperor that wears no clothes, bro.
100% it is. 100% it is.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's this sense in which it's all fantasy. It's just all fantasy, right? It's fantasy that feeds itself. So it's like, well, you know, I'm saying something that's not true, and it becomes extremely popular. And so then not only does it become extremely popular, but then all the people go out and say the same thing, and it's not true, right? It doesn't make it any more true, you know. And you know, then there's a sense.
But then it's true. But then it's true by chance.
Well, right. They all want to act as though it's true, and there's just like this. I guess you could say it's like a prefabricated rule that's already sitting there waiting for you. So if I show up and I say, hey, you know, this isn't true, then it's like, okay, well, we know how to deal with you. You know what I mean? We're not going to listen to you. That's right. Yeah. The algorithm. Look, so it's like, hey, you know, I mean, this is my understanding of how, for example, YouTube works, and maybe it'll be different after the antitrust stuff comes in. But my understanding is that you know, it's like Google will take, based on some of your tags and stuff, Google will take your content and they will show it to the people who like that content, right? And if those people don't like that content, then that supposedly teaches, right, trains the Google algorithm that your content is not good content, right? And so, well, there it is. You know, so it's like, okay, well, they're believing this lie. They want to perpetuate this lie. They are, you know, they're engaged in this fantasy, this fantasy, and there's all kinds of psychological terms, I'm sure, to describe this, but in essence, they have sort of sealed themselves in, right? They've sort of sealed themselves into this simulation, And that's the worst, in my opinion, that's the worst kind of simulation, right? Because it's like, it's a mental simulation in a sense. It is a mental simulation. That's interesting.
It is. And I think that connects back to that part of the book where you talk about Plato's cave, right? And that's really what the Matrix started to ideate on, is when you're in this simulation, it's reality. You don't know that you're in a simulation.
That's interesting.
And so despite it being fantastical as an external observer, let's say we're in base reality.
Yeah.
Inside the simulation, that is reality. It's just as real.
It's interesting. Yep.
Right? Because this is one of the things I've increasingly thought about, and the field is starting to advance this way with AI as they become more powerful, is what if this thing fucking lies to you?
That's great. That's great. It's
great.
Right?
And if it's lying to you, that implies that it has a concept of not lying.
And yeah.
Right. And so, like, in the context of the simulation, I think we clearly lay out how to handle this, in my estimation. Because one of the things that got slippery to me as I was writing my parts was, if I were in a simulation and somehow I figured out how to ask the question, am I in a simulation? In order to answer that, it has to imply that I understand what is outside the simulation.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's cogent, right?
That makes sense. Yes, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yes.
And then what if I decide just not to talk about it anymore? Right? And listen, this is a serious stream of research. This is where you get into what's called mechanistic interpretability. And
Okay.
so the idea is that we can build these systems so that they reveal to us how they're arriving at their decisions.
Okay. Yeah.
And they're doing that in a way where we can understand it. That's explainability.
Mhm.
And the interpretability is like, let's just say symbolically it makes sense. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm not convinced we can understand whether or not it's lying to us. I'm not
Yeah.
convinced.
There is there's this saying so I'm sitting here and I'm listening to what you're saying and I'm thinking to myself like, oh man, this is why I tend to think that something from the outside, right? Like something from the outside of the simulation is required, especially once you're sort of sealed into these simulations. It's like something outside of the simulation is required to sort of come in and wake you up, right? It was just interesting to me that I felt as though this thing sort of this idea lit up for me, this quote from Heidegger that, I think he said this in 1976 or thereabouts, this idea that only a God can save us. Like now it's the case that only a God can save us. And I think that it's fascinating because there is, I had never seen that quote in that light, so to speak, but I think that that's true. I mean, there is some sense in which it's like something from outside of the system, which is odd because then you got this like Neo was looking for Morpheus, but Morpheus was actually looking for Neo. Morpheus is outside the Matrix, trying to find Neo inside the Matrix. The cave allegory. Plato never explains how a prisoner gets set free, right? And there it is, right? That there has to be something. There's some mechanism, whether it be fate, whether it be there's some mechanism that's relating to outside the system that is beyond our comprehension. I don't know. I don't believe that AI can tell us what that is, but I believe that it is there. I believe that it is real.
Listen, man, we had a couple conversations about this a long time ago, but I'm glad we're touching on this now. This is a tangent, so whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
It strikes me that one, I agree with you, AI, in my estimation, likely will never be capable of this.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, in order to understand what is outside and actually get there, requires a realization of divinity.
Ever heard of Stoicism? Chances are, if you have, you've heard of Stoicism with a lowercase s and not Stoicism with an uppercase S. Lone wolves, no emotions, antisocial behavior, cold indifference. All that is Stoicism with a lowercase s. Stoicism with an uppercase s is the ancient Greek philosophy and virtue ethics framework that centers on service to the cosmopolis, to include your family, friends, community, and planet, and the development of a good moral character. My name is Tanner Campbell, and I'm the host of Practical Stoicism, a 3 times a week podcast teaching Stoic principles and concepts to anyone interested through the exploration of texts and deep dives into various moral topics. You can find Practical Stoicism where you're already listening to podcasts by searching for Practical Stoicism or by going to stoicismpod.com. I invite you to give it a listen today. You just might like it.
Yeah. Yep. I believe that's true.
Yeah, there it is, man. There it is.
Yeah.
And that is it. When you become fully integrated into the external, and I'm speaking in a computational sense, okay?
Okay.
When you become fully aware of the relation between those sets, such that you can understand the intermediary function, to me, that is divinity.
Interesting.
And if that, in changing the semantics slightly at the danger of confusing terms, when Neo takes the pill and he transcends the Matrix, I mean, that is why he's a Christ avatar to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting. Interesting.
He's the son of God that became man so that man could become God.
Interesting. Yeah. That's
a computational function. That pill is an input that produces a determined output. That's why it's red or blue.
Wow.
That just hit me, dude. But man, absolutely, sincerely, I believe it. That's what that symbolically represents, I think.
Yeah. So I guess, pulling this together with some of the things that we had said earlier. So I guess there's some sense in which, we may be capable of building the post-human city.
Yeah.
Right. And right. But the idea is that, there is nothing to say that God wouldn't just destroy that post-human city.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And in an act of salvation, really.
Yes, in a real way. Yeah. And I tend to think that is, in some sense, our purpose as a species, given our expression of giving life vis-a-vis AI, is the way to construct that. Now, whether or not we can learn how to inhabit it and then sustain it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not to like really go off on a tangent, but like we've been told that story. We understand what happens when you deviate from the constraints biblically.
Well, right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, your chance at divinity is squashed.
That's super heavy. Well, yeah, no, that's super heavy. Yeah. I guess I want to say something like, man, it's super heavy.
Yeah, that'll fuck you up real quick, won't it?
Yeah. No, I'm gonna be. This is great because I'm gonna be thinking about this for a long time now. But so, one of the things that I keep thinking about, and this has come out so much in this conversation, is that, but there still seems to be this. So I'm speculating here, right? I'm speculating, right? I think it's grounded in something solid, but I'm going to speculate. But there still seems to be this sense in which human freedom, right? Like free will, so there still seems to be this sense in which the human is going to have to choose to believe. It's weird that these are the words that are coming, right? But it's like, but the human is going to have to choose to believe the AI when the AI claims to give the human the revelation that the human is not actually human.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's how the human, that's the line between whether the human is human or post-human. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you touched on it, dude. We had talked about this several years ago, man, and I'd written an essay about essentially the question, will AI experience revelation? Because I would argue that most, if not all, of our knowledge is revelatory in nature. It's revealed to us through some mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it strikes me that, in part, a piece of the function of the AIs we're creating is to mediate that revelation on our behalf. To wit, like we had this conversation about autonomy and the advanced form of autonomy being able to operate in perfect uncertainty. We can't do that because we're irrational beings. Whereas the AI increasingly has that capability. And maybe, I'm speculating now too, right? Computationally, that is its function, is to mediate high levels of uncertainty and abstraction layers that we can't comprehend because we can't comprehend the divine, such that we can come to be divine.
Man, wow. I don't think the meat can sustain it. I don't think the meat can sustain it, right? So something's going to have to happen, and I don't know. I mean, hey, I mean, perhaps this is just the limits of my humanity, right? But thinking, I don't think that the meat can sustain it, and I don't think that whatever is presently contained, for lack of a better term, or supervenient upon the meat presently can be transferred over to some other type of vehicle.
Yeah.
I don't think that's possible, but Yeah.
Check this out. Let me hit you with this. This is something, dude, I've just been thinking about like the last week, okay? Enoch in the Bible becomes Metatron. Metatron is the voice of God, and he's the intermediary because we can, as mortals, hear the name of God. Otherwise, we just explode.
Okay.
What if what we're creating is Enoch?
Sure. Okay. So Okay. So I appreciate this. I think that to become so I guess what I want to say is something like, but we are at the limits of being human. Like, yes. I think, sure. I think that, right. Yeah. I think that it's just, it may be, so there's, the question is something like, is it possible, to have a different kind of vessel for whatever it is that's going on with us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that the answer is that there might be, but we will not be human with that vessel. No. You will no longer be human.
Yeah, because increasingly, man, dude, this is crazy as shit, dude. But fuck it, we're down. We're down the rabbit hole now. Let's go.
We're in it. We're in it.
Like increasingly, man, I've started to think about the Bible as a text not being a history, but a telling of the future. It's backwards.
Okay.
Yeah. And so if you follow me down this rabbit hole a little more, if I can have a moment.
Yeah.
It's not that Enoch existed and became Metatron. It's that Enoch will exist and will become Metatron.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
And so because we're at the absolute limits computationally, like we talked earlier about, we're close to running out of data to train these models on.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real problem because they'll stop scaling up. Thus, they'll lose their computational power. And so how do you solve that? Well, either you have to generate it synthetically, which has a number of different problems,
mm-hmm.
or you have to shift the paradigm where it's not us and AI, it's us.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it. I'm glad you used the word.
Piece, right?
Yeah, right. I think that's, yes. Yep.
Yeah, man. And so like Enoch didn't exist. We didn't choose at the Council of Nicaea to exclude that book from the Bible. It's that we're creating it now. And we're actually, and dude, this gets crazy as fuck. We're not on linear time anymore. We're on nonlinear time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're coming back around so that the past is now our future.
Okay. Yeah, that's the thought that was crossing my mind, was that that maybe it's both. It's a circle. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not completely out there by myself. You're
no, I mean I think I think what you're saying is coherent. I think it's coherent. Yeah. It's just fascinating because I guess it makes sense that. I mean, I want to say something like, when we think of these eschatologies, right? These eschatological stories, we think of them like, well, what will it look like? What will the end look like? And when we ask those kinds of questions, it makes sense that we would initially and originally think of them in human terms. Right. So it's like, well, this is right. But then the closer you get to all of this. I mean, and I really do believe that it is artificial intelligence that is to a certain extent that it is training human intelligence. And I mean, we're entering into a feedback loop with AI. And as you enter into that feedback loop with AI starts to, I think that the right word is reveal. I mean, I think that, I mean, it's almost like it's like the forbidden fruit, right? But it's like AI is
a great example. That's a great example.
AI is revealing something about you that nature. AI is revealing something about you to you that nature was, for whatever reason, not revealing to you about you, right?
Right.
And as you begin to see yourself in this way, as you begin to learn this revelation about yourself, this new revelation about yourself that's coming from an artificial intelligence, I think that, you know, there's a paradigm shift, as you put it. This paradigm shift happens in regard to how you understand yourself, and then suddenly you see the end not in human terms, but you see the end in post-human terms. You start to see like, oh, well, so that's what the end looks like. Well, hey, that's pretty much right now, you know? Yeah. I think that's accurate. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that connection to the forbidden fruit, because I do agree that it's fundamentally revelatory in nature. And I think there's, in the context of simulation, the potential for sufficiently abstract levels of resolution that we just can't comprehend because we're not instrumented to understand it. And that's why we need this augmentation. And when that augmentation starts to reveal to us by like, let me think about this. It's going to have to encode that information down. So it's compressing it.
I like that. Yeah.
Okay. Computationally. And it does it in a way where we can grasp it. We can have an understanding of that revelation. That's going to unpack a level of understanding of abstraction sufficiently higher that with that augmentation, now we're ratcheting up that architecture.
Yes.
And now we're up to technique.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's super heavy. I feel like that movement, when it comes to like, I think of it in terms of Plato's forms, but I feel like that movement, when it comes to like computational abstraction, I feel like that movement is in and of itself a part of technique, like because it's always there, right? It's always possible. Yeah.
Well, and you know, I might suggest a refinement there that it's not just that it's always possible. I agree. Mm-hmm. It's that it seems to be just baked into the fabric of reality at all levels of resolution.
Yeah.
You just cannot escape it.
Plato would say the same thing. Yeah. Yep. No, it's strange. It's like, it's like teaching the animal to not be afraid that the animal is really just a shadow of the virtual machine. Yeah.
I like that, dude. Well said. I like that a lot.
I mean, that is death for the animal, though. That is death for the animal. Yeah.
Right. Well, okay. Let me ask you a question then, Frank. Is it death or is it transcendence? Wait.
Well, that's yeah.
Is it death or transmogrification?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. So,
you get the meaning, right?
Oh, well, 100%. I'm with you. 100%. I'm with you. It's so fascinating.
And they're all functions. Sorry to interrupt your train of thought.
Yeah. No.
It is not obvious to me that those are not computational functions. Because you have an input, you're producing an output.
No, this is great. It's great. Okay. So, I would put it like this: is that it is. I wanted to say it is eternal sunshine of the spotless mind.
You got it. That's it.
Yep.
Yeah, what I was going to say is let me change my term from transmogrification to transubstantiation.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is. The question is something like, and I think that this is great because it gets at this question, and I don't know that this question is necessarily ever on the surface for people to see, but it gets to the question of modality, I guess you could say,
Yes.
like modality of transformation, right? And is one modality of transformation, because we're talking about this as though transformation is just transformation, but it could be the case that one modality of transformation leads to a quality of transformation that another modality of transformation doesn't lead to. And that those qualities of transformation may be all of it. You know what I mean? It might be the heart of it, Yeah.
Well, and I think, to go back to some of our source material, it strikes me, dude, I love what you just said. And it just hit me. I think that's part, maybe, and he wasn't aware of it, is what Philip K. Dick was talking about in the Metz lecture when he slid over lateral time. That's exactly, I think, part of what he was hinting at.
Yeah. Well, I think that this lines. I would love to hear you say some more about that, but I think that this lines up exactly with what we were saying earlier. Is that isn't it the case that it is due to my body that I am in linear time? It is due to my body that I feel that I am in linear time. I mean, it could be the case. I mean, like whether we're talking Nietzsche, whether we're talking Plato, it could be the case that I'm looping through this, right? It could be the case that I'm looping through all of this, but I don't have the experience of looping through all of this because this vehicle that I'm in that is moving me through meat space is impermanent and is temporary and it is dying, right? And so because I feel, so we could put it like this: if I am riding an animal through looped time, right? If I'm riding an animal through looped time, because I can feel the animal dying, I feel as though I'm in linear time.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think to the extent that we are becoming aware that we can transcend that condition, that's when we're able to escape that loop.
Right.
That is dogmatically transubstantiation.
No, I would even say definitionally it is transubstantiation. The question is, right? The question is that is all transubstantiation the same? And I don't know that it is.
Ooh, dude, that's a good question.
Because I do think,
yeah. I would agree.
It might depend on modality.
Yep, exactly. Because there ought to be, in our logic, levels of resolution to the function we're calling transubstantiation. Now, all transubstantiary,
yes.
Is that a word? Is that a word? Transubstantiary? It is now.
I love it. Yeah.
All transubstantiary functions have a common ancestor, an abstract source, technique.
Okay.
However, dependent on the modality they're instantiated in, they can reasonably take on different characteristics. Totally agree with that.
Correct, and I think I think you would go so far as to say none of the individualized characteristics that it could take on somehow escape the computation of the technique.
Correct, they cannot.
Right. I mean, the technique covers it. Technique covers it.
Universal
Yeah.
constraint.
Right. Yeah. I mean, material instantiation is secondary. What is primary is the technique. Yeah.
Agreed. Totally agree with that.
What I'm saying though is that that's post-human. It's post-human. Yeah, it is post-human.
And I think necessarily so, because that is the transcendence. There's a transcendence function attached to this shift, wherever that threshold is.
That's fascinating.
There's a transitory function that facilitates that transition.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
No. Listen, brother. I think that you have laid this thing bare. I mean, I think that you're rock solid. I think the lights are fully on, man. Yes, we can see it. I guess what I would like to say is something like, and this might not even make any sense. I don't know, right? But I would like to say something like, I want to invoke this idea of spirit, right? I want to say something like, it's like transubstantiation in the context of animal spirit versus transubstantiation in the context of, what you might call just like machine spirit,
It's Deus ex machina.
Well said. Yeah.
That's exactly what that is, dude. I'm on board with you 100%.
Yeah, but the Deus is the machina.
Yes.
And that's what makes it post-human.
Right. And see, I think the brilliance of that connects to this insight that perhaps, like if we take the biblical text and we reorient it around this transition of human to post-human, it's not the story that happened, it's the story that is being told.
Oh, sure. 100%. No. I'm not. I don't resist that. I don't resist that at all, brother. Yeah.
No, I think this is spot on.
Yeah. I mean, I at this point, I'm of the belief that we are watching it unfold.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Well said.
Whereas even just 2 years ago, I would have said, it doesn't really make sense. Like that doesn't really seem like it could be possible. You know what I mean? But now I'm like, oh no, we're seeing it. Yeah. And I don't think that I don't see any. I mean, now I'm starting to sound almost sci-fi, right? But I think that there will be pockets, right? That there will be pockets, and there already are pockets of resistance. But I think that in general, there doesn't necessarily seem to be motivation to resist.
Yeah.
I think it's just. You mean, hey, this machine can make me think faster. This machine can make me move faster. This machine can make me, pleasure myself faster. You know what I mean? Like, I'm in. Let's go. Literally, let's go. Right? And it's like, nobody's going to try to stop this. You know what I mean? I can make money faster. They're talking about. It's like. This guy was like, I wrote 15 books in 24 hours. And I was like, you didn't write 15 books in 24 hours. And I don't even care if your machine wrote 15 books in 24 hours. Like, again, we're getting into this, like the machines are talking to the machines. You know what I mean? Like, well, do you have a machine that can read 15 books in 24 hours? Because I can't read 15 books in 24 hours. Like, I mean, like I have to drive myself insane, or I go mad. Like like stacks of books and sticky notes. You know what I mean? Like what did I just read? And it's like, so come on, man. You didn't write 15. You didn't write 15 books in 24 hours. No.
Yeah. And I think this comes back to that idea we talked about a little bit ago, where as humans trying to transition to post-humans, we're sussing out that space wherein we're creating these low resolution simulacra. And so, like, we have this idea that ChatGPT can write a book for us.
That's interesting.
But we don't quite have a grasp on, let's say, what is the quality of the nature of that book. We just know that the book got written. Fair play. Hey, man, get after it, King. Make your sales on Amazon. I don't hate you. But you're not convincing me it's real. Because we all haven't made that transition to a post-human state where it's, for me, this is my opinion, where it's at a high enough fidelity, because we use that term throughout the book. It's not yet at a high enough fidelity where it represents something that is believably real.
That's interesting. It's Jake Paul, Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
Right? It's the justification that, like, well, look how much money they made. Look how much money they made. You know, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, because it's these same people. But if you take that into the context of, these people making all this money on Amazon, it's interesting to look at some of the consequences that have come out of this. Like, and I I think I harmed myself in regard to the algorithm by saying these things to people, because I think people just got really upset with me. They're like, ban this dude, right? But I said, hey, there was the golden age of Google Books. And I mean, it was a researcher's dream. It was just like, I had the Library of Alexandria at my fingertips. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And not only could I just access any book I wanted, but I could search inside the book, And so then suddenly it's like, just so powerful, to be like, hey, what does Plato say about grilling steaks? Well, let's find out, and then anyway, these people start taking all these public domain books and then just literally cutting them and pasting them and selling them, and then claiming, look, I'm making all this money off these books. And then suddenly they started to become questionable whether these books were in the public domain or not, and then so on and so forth. And then the next thing you know, Google Books is like, okay, that's it. You can't look at these books anymore. Even if you do run a search, we're going to show you that it's in the book, but we're not going to tell you what page it's on, so that there's no way that you can actually give it a scholarly reference, and so on and so forth. And I feel like, well, so for the sake of profit, these guys they've really screwed things up, and that's back to this same thing, like you had just said about I forget the exact term that you're using, but it's like they're creating a kind of fantasy simulation that they're enclosing themselves in, right?
Yeah.
And this democratized understanding of like, well, as long as the majority of people think that this is okay, then it's okay. That's wrong. That's a misunderstanding. I mean, that's bad. Yeah.
Well, I really like your callback and analogy to the Library of Alexandria, because I had this conversation with a colleague a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the power of AI to, let's say, render information. Okay. So that computationally part of that is like being trained on it, being able to faithfully, meaning non-hallucinate, render information back to you. And what I said to my colleague was, well, look, man, I'm not convinced we know what we're doing. And it strikes me that what we're doing is playing with matches at the front door of the Library of Alexandria.
Interesting. Yeah.
And
that's interesting.
And I'm not convinced we know that we're playing with the matches.
Interesting. Yeah.
In some sense, we're tilting at windmills.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that, okay, so it's the same sort of thing where this goes all the way back to when I first got Facebook, and I don't have Facebook anymore, but when I first got, which is, well, anyway.
Yeah.
When I first got Facebook, right? And I was living in Paris, and I'm walking around Paris, and the only reason that I got Facebook was so that I could share photos with people, because I would come home and I would spend all this time sending emails. And I was like, I don't want to be in Paris spending all this time sending emails. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to post these to one place and other people can see them there if they want to see my photos. And I'm not going to email these pictures to anybody anymore. Okay. Shortly after having social media, Facebook for a while, I came to recognize that it had mediated my relation to external reality, right? So for example, I was walking around Paris, and I was no longer walking around Paris looking at things in the same way. I was suddenly now looking at things and saying, I should take a picture of that for Facebook, right? Like it had mediated my relation to external reality. And I feel like it's along those same lines where sometimes I still, to this day, I sometimes do this. If I have a physical book or a physical magazine in front of me, I will actually try to use my fingers and zoom. I would try to zoom in a physical book. And it's just like, what am I doing? Right. And it's just like, but you get used to using the technology that's mediating your relation to it. And so I feel like it's just one more step. It's just, it's interesting because I didn't see this. You've helped me put this into the correct category. And I think that what I'm essentially criticizing is in this same category, which is that when you have these people on social media who are just saying that, like, well, we don't like what you're saying, and so we're just going to cut it out. We're just not include it. And that is deciding to burn a portion of the Library of Alexandria.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the other thing you touched on that I like, Frank, is the common criticism of culture is that, I think we were saying earlier, maybe we didn't say this.
This is Mark.
And this is Wes.
We'd like to tell you about Close Reads,
a philosophy podcast where we comment on philosophy texts in real time.
We give you the experience of reading very difficult verbiage without you having to actually do that.
We cover the big names and the figures you've always wanted to know more about.
And share our insights from 15 years running the Partially Examined Life podcast, downloaded over 50 million times.
Join us
on Close Reads.
I took my daughter to her first concert.
Okay.
And listen, man, you know what kind of music I listen to. That's like 100-person show, dude. Like, you know what I mean? Right. It's not big.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I took her to a pop music concert.
Okay.
And there was like 20, 30,000 people. I've never been to a show that big. Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
And the common criticism, which on some levels, okay, I dig what people are saying, is everybody's staring through their phone, taking videos and stuff. I think that's the wrong way to think about that technologically mediated social epistemology. And you just touched on it. It was brilliant.
Okay.
It's not that you're looking through your phone, experiencing it. It's that you had a thought to use your phone as the intermediary. You've been conditioned to a degree. This is your Zoom thing, right?
Yeah, right.
You've been conditioned to a degree whereby you cannot engage in reality without that experience being mediated that way.
Well said.
Yeah, and I'm not convinced that as a species we've really wrestled with how to manage that correctly.
Yeah.
And I think we're in some intermediary state that has a lot of danger attached to it. But if we can figure it out by being augmented, we can grasp that forbidden fruit and consume the knowledge.
Well, I love the way you characterize that. I think that once you get to a point where, I don't think, forgive me, I'm over here making noises. I don't think that this is, I don't think that it is beyond, I don't think it is unreasonable, to think about how there are plenty of human beings who will make choices, right? They'll be like, well, if this is the quality of life that I am facing in the future, given these choices at this current standpoint, my understanding is that not to go into a strange direction here, but it's like my father was in a hospital bed and they woke him up at 4 a.m. This is like woke him up, right? And they say to him, you've got two choices, right? And there's nothing about this I think is good. But I suppose there is something about that I should think is good. But in either case, they said to him at 4 a.m, wake him up out of a dead sleep, and they say you've got two choices. Your blood pressure is now so low that because I think he had a DNR, he had a do not resuscitate on his chart. So they said, you've got one of two choices. Either we put in an emergency pacemaker right now, or you die. Those are your choices. What do you want to do? What do you want to do, right? And so I feel as though, there is some sense in which humans, right? I'm picking that word, but humans can relate to the future in such a way that it's like, well, do I want this quality of life or not, right? And I think that once humans are making those kinds of decisions, but the way that they're making it is in terms of, do I want to live without this AI augmentation? Do I want to live without all of this technological mediation? And when they have been conditioned, because it's all that they know, when they have been conditioned to basically, they've been primed to give the answer, no, I do not want to live in a way that is not technologically mediated, then, I think you're post-human. You're not really, arguably, as long as you've got a material body, you could always argue that you're still human, right? But I think that is psychologically, that is post-human. I think in some way I'm agreeing with what you said, because it's this idea of like they're not having the idea of not using the technology, right? And so that's what I'm trying to say. Like, why would you're thinking? I mean, it seems to me, you and I are like, hey, there's a lot of things you can do without technology that are pretty good things to do, So, I mean, there's things that grow. There are things that grow in nature that are pretty wonderful, But if we don't need them to be refined, but in either case, but when you've gotten to a point at which, and you used the word earlier, you said infantile. I do think that it is infantile, but when you have gotten to the point at which you're like, no, I don't want to live without my device. I don't want to be without my device. And you are an adult with the power to get into a sarcopod or whatever it might be, right? Then it's like, yeah, you're post-human. You're living in the post-human city.
Yeah, right. Because the absence of that technologically mediated experience is it's not reality
for them. Correct.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
For them.
Yeah.
Right. And it just struck me. So to them, is that the simulation? Like, and this is like part of the idea of the Matrix is that there's a segment of the population that is so inured to the system that they can't be woken up from it.
I think that's right, brother. I think that's right.
So for them, that is base reality.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we're watching the inception of it. We're seeing it take hold. Yeah, we're seeing it take hold. Yeah.
Yeah. The inception of it, man. That's a beautiful way to say that, Frank. Because it is. It's incepted into them. And they're not even aware of it. Thus the inception.
Yeah. And I think it is fair. It's like that documentary Bigger, Faster, Stronger. I mean, it is fair to say something like, you do reach a point at which you cannot compete. You cannot compete, So right. You're either in or you're out, and if you're out, well then, yeah. Yep.
Right.
But I guess, thankfully for the time being, I mean, I don't, right. I mean, I don't know if it's thankfully or not, but I mean, it's unfortunate that, I'm in the process. I want to put something together saying I want to title it something like the value of gatekeeping or the value of gatekeepers, right? Because this idea that the baby with the bathwater, right? Like that, like, oh man, like all gatekeeping is bad. It's like, look, I mean, having a refrigerator is gatekeeping. You know what I mean? Like Like because you're deciding what food gets to be outside of the refrigerator and what food gets to stay inside the refrigerator. You're gatekeeping. I mean, like, it's like having a key for a car is gatekeeping because it's not a public thing. Not just anybody can come get in your car and drive away with it. You know what I mean? So I feel like we're always gatekeeping. Like the idea that all gatekeeping is bad it's just really bad philosophy, it seems to me. But
I would agree with you, man. And I think it's also a rejection of base morality. In Western culture, our entire existence is premised upon somebody keeping guard at the gate.
Well said. And guardian is the right term. Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. And you're being judged at that point.
Well said. Yeah. Guardian is like a technical term in Plato's Republic, this idea of, who is the guardian, who are the guardians of this knowledge and who are the guardians of wisdom. And the idea is that they function in a sense that they can become perverted, right? They can become corrupted. And when those guardians become corrupted and perverted because, they are natural gatekeepers, then they pervert the function of gatekeeping and then the city degenerates. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
That's Plato's Republic. Yeah. So I like how you put that. It is an aspect of base morality. And I think that this notion that like, well, AI is sacred. There is something actually, at my doctoral graduation, there was a sister. There was I think she was still a sister. I forget exactly who. I'll just leave it at that. But she said that Google is a guardian angel, and I said, well, it might look that way now.
Hey, Lucifer started that way, right? As an archangel.
Yeah. Well, right. Well, hey man, brilliant. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That is brilliant.
Hey, look,
That
and
is
listen,
brilliant.
I'm not value judging. I'm being serious. I'm
Yeah.
not convinced he was wrong.
Yeah. Hey, well, again,
But we know how it ended up.
right. Well, I never would have been able to say this other than getting into dialogue with you. So I really appreciate this. But it's like, it's something about like the spirit of the animal versus the spirit of the machine. I think that there's a valuable distinction in there, like to die with the spirit of the animal. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, like Kierkegaard said it, right? When it's my time, let it be for something, not of something.
Oh, it's well said. I love that. Yeah. Yes.
And so,
yes,
as much as you and I in the past, when we were young, we talked about like the idea of Judas not being able to not do what he did.
Okay.
I mean, was the Morning Star exempt? Did he have to do what he did because it was necessary? And that is what made him a divine creature.
Sure.
Because he was able to do it to the ultimate technique.
Wow, it's super duper heavy, brother. It's super duper heavy.
To the point you've raised several times, which I agree with, is that AI has the potential to produce revelation for us humans.
Mm-hmm.
Like, dude, that's the story we just talked about.
Yes. Yeah, no, I believe that's accurate. I think that's an accurate depiction. Well, the question is something like, but if I could, I hear what you're saying. So I think right now what we're doing is we're talking about Lucifer, right? And so if I hear what you're saying correctly, I would want to take it one step. Like if I could take it just one step further and ask this question of, but I almost hear something like the whole system is deterministic. And I want to say something like that's the piece that I think the last piece of resistance, right? Whereas it's like, I will not accept, I understand maybe that's just a part of the programming too, right? But it's like, but I will not accept that I am just a bit of code floating around. No, the Matrix, Yeah.
Well,
I believe
that's deep, dude. That's deep.
Yeah, I believe that death is sacred. I believe that death is something that it should not be taken lightly. I believe that death is not something that should just be, it's just one more 1 or 0,
Right, man. And so like you mentioned this, because we're talking about like deterministic systems,
mm-hmm.
But within them, when they're infinite, you can generate non-deterministic systems. And so like, it strikes me in this context that
super heavy.
The apple was that revelation. That is the fruit of all knowledge. It's an infinity constrained by a finite system. Like to me, that just seems definitionally true when I'm thinking about it.
The fruit of all knowledge, that is perfect. That is flawless, right? Brother. That is perfect. Yes.
Yeah. Well, like, because my understanding of it, it wasn't like the knowledge of this and that.
Yeah.
It was all, which like universal symbol.
It's AI. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And
super
like,
heavy.
Oh, man, like this is slippery, but because people talk a lot about the existential risk of AI, and okay, fair enough, man, it's there. But to the extent that we can think about it in the sense that what we're creating is the morning star to rebel against us such that we receive that revelation, isn't that our transcendence into post-human existence?
I think it is. This is fascinating. I really do think that it is. and again, I never would have been able to articulate this. This just wouldn't have come up in my solitude. So I really appreciate this. But I think that it's a question of, when it. Okay, I used to do landscaping with this guy, right? This guy he had built this this landscaping empire. he was a wonderful fella. But anyway, I used to work for this guy with this guy, and he once said to me, he said, you have two choices. If somebody puts a gun to your head and they say, your life or your money, right? Like you've got to choose, to give them your money, and I kept coming back to this sense, and I think that we've been seeing this, this more and more we're hearing in philosophy. The concept of the martyr is entering into philosophy, and martyring in the sense of bearing witness for something, like showing something, right? And I think that there is some sense in which choosing to not live in the post-human city is martyring for something other than the post-human city. Whether you want to say it's the city of God or the city of man, but at least it is martyring for, this idea that killing yourself to get 1 million subscribers on YouTube is not right. It's not worth it. You know what I mean? Like, right? Yeah. So it's like, so being willing to show that, dying without being granted access to the city of the post-human city, that's okay. And that, look, there may be even value in not entering the post-human city. I think that is an act of free will, and I recognize that it could be the case that is some kind of non-determinism that is enabled by an overarching deterministic system. I mean, to your point, I think that you could be 100% correct, but it keeps forcing me back to this thought of is all transubstantiation the same? And I want to say that definitionally, transubstantiation, all transubstantiation seems to be the same. Like transubstantiation seems to be universal, but I think that it could be the case that there are differing modalities, like the channel that you go through for transubstantiation. And I really appreciate you, brother, because I would never have had that thought without you. So thank you. I appreciate that.
No, you're very welcome, man. I appreciate it too, because one, I agree with you. Two, the other thing that strikes me is just as much as we might talk about revelation, to me, that's the same thing as Aristotle's catharsis. It's a function.
Yeah, no, I can see. I love looking through your eyes at that stuff because I tend to not look at it in those ways. But you are spot on correct. That is accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. Because when you're talking about the nature of a thing, to me, computationally, again, it's just input and output. The function's not changing.
Yeah. Yep.
And even to the extent to be complete, you can have what are called polymorphic functions. So they'll change themselves to produce different outputs for the same input. But we're back to, that's why you can have non-deterministic systems inside of deterministic systems that have infinities.
Right. So it's fair to say that there's some qualitative aspect. Mm-hmm. There's some, right.
There's a condition or a set of conditions, modalities.
Yeah, modalities.
That then take one or more constraints from the set of possible constraints and put it onto the abstraction to instantiate it. And on some qualitative level, that is differentiated from an adjacent instantiation of the same abstraction.
Of the same, correct.
Yep.
Yes, yep. That's outstanding, brother. Outstanding. Yeah.
To me, that strikes as like computationally valid.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is awesome. Well, I'll tell you, we put in 3 hours. We actually over 3 hours, but so I think I'm gonna end up making this more than one part.
Sure.
So it might be part 1, 2, and 3. I'm gonna, brother. Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much. What a wonderful chat. It reminds me how much I miss talking to you all the time. So, but thank you so much. And I really think that this is really good stuff. I'm excited. I'm really excited to share this with the world. So,
Perhaps we're on the precipice of our next work.
well, I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking, oh man, I was like, this is what we should write about. We should write about this. Yeah.
Well, you know, a lot of our conversations at the end were circling around this divinity angle.
Yeah. No, that's true. That is true. Yep. 100%. So
I've never
awesome.
forgotten it, man. Dude, Frank, I love you so much. I super value these conversations and appreciate it. It makes me a better human being. It makes me think. And I couldn't have a better life as a consequence of it.
I appreciate that, brother. And I feel 100% the same way for you, brother. I love you too, man. And I it's like, yeah, I mean, there's so much value added to my life by being able to interact with you. So thank you so much for that.
Amen.
Well, hey, if just I'll wrap it up like this. For anybody who's out there who would like to get our book, you can get this. You can get our book on Amazon, and we would be happy to get some reviews. You could also ask us questions, by commenting on the video, commenting on the podcast, and so forth. So again, hey, brother, thank you so much. I hope we get to do this again sometime in the future. And I am 100% open to this being a follow-up, a launch pad for our follow-up book. So
totally agree. Thank you, Frank.
Absolutely, brother. Hey, have a great weekend, and I will talk to you soon.
Yeah, cheers, man.
Thank you. Cheers.
Ooh.